and welcome. My name is Susan Cohen, and I serve as the Assistant Vice Chancellor of Alumni Relations at Washington University. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's session. As you most likely know, due to COVID-19, all of our in-person alumni events have been canceled. So we've been hard at work looking for ways to connect with alumni, parents, and friends across the world. We are very excited to present our first virtual Alumni Spotlight. Now, before we begin, I'd like to explain the format for today's session. There'll be two people speaking. You'll only hear and see me and our presenter. However, we encourage you to participate by asking questions. To do that, type a question in the Q&A box at any time during the talk. By now, I'm sure you've participated in numerous Zoom meetings. Just a reminder, if you have issues with audio, you may want to shut down programs running in the background or dial in from your telephone. Our full presentation will last about 15 minutes or so. Dr. Bono will speak, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll share it on the Alumni Association website and on our YouTube channel later in the week. Perhaps most important, I would like to thank you in advance for your patience in case we encounter any technical difficulties along the way. As I mentioned, this is our first virtual event. With that, I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Tim Bono. In a recent alumni survey, mental health and wellness emerged as the most requested topic for programming during the current pandemic. So we thought we'd launch with a topic that we knew would be of great interest. And we could not have selected a more perfect speaker than alumnus and valued member of the university community, Tim Bono. Dr. Bono graduated from WashU in 2005 with a bachelor's degree, and then went on to earn both a Master of Arts and a PhD from WashU. He specializes in psychological and neurological research. His most popular class taught here at WashU is the psychology of young adulthood and the science of happiness. During today's talk, Tim will be drawing on strategies from his positive psychology course that can help us maintain psychological health even during these challenging times. I am pleased to introduce you to Dr. Tim Bono. Tim, take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Susan, for organizing this event and inviting me to speak today. Thanks everybody for joining us. As Susan mentioned to you, I am a very proud alumnus of Washington University, and given that I knew I'd be speaking today to my fellow alumni, I decided to dig into the archives and consider my own journey in terms of how all that got started. Oh, and I think that I have not yet shared my screen, so I'm gonna do that right now. So you can see my slideshow, because as I was digging into the archives, I actually found a picture from my very first day at Washington University. So this is back from 2001. This is the day that I moved into my freshman dorm room. That was the third floor of Lee House, and in case anybody lived on the South 40 when you were a freshman. That's how it all got started. Little did I know when that picture was taken in 2001 that 19 years later I'd still be at WashU, but I certainly feel very fortunate to be part of such a wonderful community. Since the time that picture was taken, I earned undergraduate and graduate degrees from Washington University, and currently I'm a psychologist and I teach undergraduate courses related to positive psychology and well-being. And so for today, as Susan mentioned, I was invited to draw a few ideas from my class and from a book that I released recently that I think can offer some strategies for maintaining mental health given the very challenging circumstances that we are in right now. So I'll be drawing some ideas from that positive psychology course that I teach each spring. And in terms of my outline for you, I'm going to center this material around two questions that I've been receiving a lot lately from friends and family. The first question that I've been getting from a lot of people lately is this question of, can we really be happy at a time like this? A lot of people have been saying, all right, happiness guy, what do you have to say about your topic during a global crisis? I'll be providing some insight into that. And the other question that I've been getting a lot lately is, how can we best take care of our mental health right now? As Susan mentioned, this is a topic that appeared on that alumni survey, is something that people really want to know about. And so I'll be providing some insights about this question also, because we know that this situation is affecting a lot of people's well-being. So I'll be outlining some strategies from the field that I hope can be helpful there as well. We also put out a call for alumni to share some of their own stories, and we received a lot of responses. Thank you to everybody who submitted something. So I'll be incorporating a couple of those examples as well. And also, as Susan mentioned, if you should have questions or comments at any point, please feel free to enter those in the Q&A box, and then there will be plenty of time to discuss those after I finish offering some insight into these two questions in particular. So let's take a look at a first one, this question of, can we really be happy at a time like this? And to provide some insight here, I'm going to share with you some material that I actually present on the very first day of my positive psychology course when I'm teaching this course each spring. Because there are two basic premises that I put out there right at the beginning of the course that debunk some of the misconceptions that people have about the nature of happiness. And the first one of those is this idea that positive psychology is not about being happy all the time. I think that one of the biggest myths that people have about the nature of happiness and how to pursue it is this idea that we're supposed to be happy all the time. There are some people who think that if they're not happy all the time, then something must be wrong with them. But any psychologist will tell you that if you were happy all the time, that would be the indication that something were wrong with you. Because we humans have evolved this incredibly complex set of emotions, and we know that there's a time and a place for each of them, and that it is a natural and even a healthy response to experience sadness and anxiety when things are not going well for us, or when we find ourselves in circumstances that aren't good for us. So part of psychological health involves understanding, number one, that negativity is simply part of life. And then number two, it's about having strategies that allow us to cope effectively with that negativity so that we can get back on the path toward well-being a bit more easily. So the first basic premise is that it's not about being happy all the time. It's about understanding that negativity happens and that we have to know how to respond to it. The second basic premise is that not only is positive psychology not about being happy all the time, it's actually not even about becoming happy. There's nothing about the articles we write or the research we conduct or the classes we teach that have as their goal to make people happy. Instead, what this field is quite passionate about, it's about helping people become happier. So it's not about being happy, it's about being happier. And many people look at that and they say, well, wait a second, what's the difference between those two phrases? Aren't those really one and the same? From my perspective, there is a world of difference between those two phrases. Because for us to go about our lives saying, gosh, I just want to be happy. What do I need to do to be happy? What kind of a job should I have to be happy? How much money do I need to have to be happy? Those questions treat happiness as if it is a binary, a yes or a no, a 1 or a 0. It sort of implies that either we're going to be happy or we're going to be unhappy. But it turns out that a much more useful approach to the pursuit of happiness is to acknowledge that happiness itself resides on a continuum. And that instead of asking, how can I be happy, as if that is a destination off on the horizon, much better is to say, how can I be happier? What are the behaviors and the mindsets that I can be incorporating into my life that wherever I fall on the emotion continuum right now, whether I'm already feeling pretty happy or maybe I'm feeling kind of neutral, maybe I'm going through a really rough time right now, are there at least some things I can be doing to become happier? Because the reality is that there's always going to be something that prevents us from being as happy as we wish we could be. There's always going to be stuff that's outside of our control that puts a cap on our happiness. But the good news is that there's also usually at least some things we can be doing to become happier. And that's why positive psychology is much more interested in this second phrase, to identify, again, those behaviors and mindsets that help shift us toward the happier side of the continuum instead of this binary notion of either I'm happy or I'm unhappy. So in the rest of my time with you, that's what I'd like to do, is outline what are some of those things we can be doing day in and day out to become happier, even amid this global pandemic and the challenges that are placing a limit on how happy we might be otherwise. Let's see if we can at least think of some other strategies we can incorporate to become happier. Now, when we look at the research in positive psychology, one of the things that we find is that one of the most important drivers of our psychological health and well-being is having a sense of autonomy. And in general, the most effective strategies for increasing our psychological health will promote that sense that we are free agents and that we are able to live as we wish and that we are able to pursue our interests and our values according to our own free will without any undue restraints. And that is part of what has made this coronavirus situation so challenging. Every time you turn on the news or you scroll through social media, it can very easily feel like things are spinning out of control. So in the interest of maintaining our mental health, then it becomes really important to focus on those things that are still within our control and that can still bring a sense of purpose and well-being, even in the midst of these stay-at-home orders and the general angst over the nature of this virus and the impact it's having on our economy, on our jobs, and on our lives in general. So there are 4 behaviors in particular that I'd like to outline that can help us restore a sense of autonomy and that also are well documented in psychological research as key contributors to our well-being. And what's fun about this is that I actually had come up with those 4 strategies even before we put out the call for people to submit their stories, and yet across the board, almost all of the anecdotes that people shared fell neatly into one or more of those 4 areas. So let's take them one at a time. The first of those strategies is the very simple practice of gratitude. Now, although there are a lot of negative things going on in the world around us, gratitude is important because it helps remind us that there are still many acts of kindness and generosity happening all throughout the world. And the simple practice of gratitude is all about directing attention to those good things that are still going on. And that shift in perspective can be very helpful in maintaining a sense of well-being, even amid all the stressors. One of my favorite examples of this came from Jacqueline Buxbaum, who is the mother of Max, who graduated last year. And she started an inspiration bulletin board where she just jots down quotes and other ideas that are a source of positivity. And this is probably a great thing to look at every day. Because again, you turn on the news, you see other information that directs our attention to negative things. Jotting down quick quotes that are inspiring to you or other behaviors or things that you've noticed that you see out in the streets or other people doing reminds you that there's still good in the world. Another example we received was from another alum, Suzanne Rayfield Chilton, and she says, as a 2020 apartment sequestered retired widow, I embrace family and friends on FaceTime, delivered groceries, balcony happy hours, books and movies, piano, virtual meetings, virtual ballet classes, sewing masks and historical attire, and planning the future. This is another excellent example and another really important way to direct attention to those good things that some of which we might take for granted, but placing our attention there can really go a long way in increasing our overall well-being. One of the ways that psychologists think about happiness is with a simple formula that says that it's the quotient of what we have as compared to what we want. And the practice of gratitude is ultimately shining a spotlight on the good things in our lives that we already have that we may simply have lost sight of. We know that these days it's very easy for us to get fixated on the denominator of this formula, especially in the days of social media. It becomes very easy to scroll through Facebook or Instagram and get caught up with what everybody else is doing and all the amazing things that they're doing and all the accomplishments they have. Well, it was Teddy Roosevelt who once said, comparison is the thief of joy. And this is something that psychologists have known for a long time, even before the advent of social media. We've known that probably the single biggest barrier to a sense of well-being is social comparison. It's really hard to be happy if we constantly have our head over our shoulder, wondering how we measure up to those around us. So if we can catch ourselves in the act, and this is easier said than done, we are social creatures by nature. It's only natural that we're going to be tuned into what other people are doing. But one of the things that a bunch of you actually said in the submissions that you offered, there were a number of people who said that you actually found it helpful to limit how much time you've been spending on social media. A few people even said that they got rid of social media altogether. And that can be one step toward increasing our well-being, especially if we find that it's turning into this vehicle for comparing ourselves to others. And instead, if we can redirect our attention from what we want, how we wish life could be, and instead say, well, okay, maybe things aren't as perfect as I'd like them to be, but what are still some of the good things going on in my life? Placing attention on that numerator is a surefire way to increase our overall happiness and indeed help us to feel happier day in and day out. Again, it's not to say that we should ignore any of the negative things going on. We should stay aware of that, but we should balance that by placing attention and expressing gratitude for those things that are still going well. So that's the first one, the practice of gratitude. Let's move now to the second one, which is to make progress toward goals. We know that it's important to have goals that we work toward each day because that can help us feel a sense of accomplishment. And it's okay to focus even on small goals, on things like baking something or reading a few pages in a book that we've been needing to get to, or going for a run, or even something as simple as making the bed in the morning. Because very often the satisfaction that comes from accomplishing even small tasks can motivate us to accomplish bigger tasks later in the day. And that sense of accomplishment proves to be especially important for our overall well-being. Let me share with you a couple of examples from alumni who submitted ideas here. So we have Pamela Herman. This was one of my classmates from the class of 2005. She says, I start each day with a 6:30 a.m. workout on Zoom with Burn Boot Camp Manchester. It helps me start my day with a routine. I make a full breakfast, shower, get fully dressed and ready for work as usual. My day often consists of at least 6 hours of Zoom conference calls, so I get ready the same way I would as if I was going to the office. We also do daily huddles to stay in touch as a team. And this is very effective. This is very consistent with what the research tells us, that if we can start our day, even with small tasks, like making a full breakfast, taking a shower, getting fully dressed, the sense of accomplishment that we can feel from accomplishing even something small can carry over and motivate larger behaviors later in the day. Another example came from Rosalind Early from the class of 2003. She says, I've gotten into 2 different creative projects, instant photography and brush lettering. So this is another time where a lot of people are improving their well-being by directing their attention to those activities that bring them a sense of accomplishment. And again, that sense of accomplishment, the satisfaction from that is a very good way to feel happier in our day-to-day routines. And she even pointed out a particular brush letter, this E. She said she was especially proud of that, and the research would tell us that that likely gave her a sense of satisfaction that probably motivated her to accomplish other things later in the day. So it can even be small things that we get accomplishment from that inspires us to keep working hard in other areas of life that are important for us. All right, the third of those behaviors that are important to feel happier is to take care of our physical health, because at the foundation of our psychological health is our physical health. We know that getting exercise on a regular basis is really important because we know that physical activity triggers the release of neurotransmitters that can boost our mood. And it can also put the brakes on negative thinking cycles that are often characteristic of anxiety and depression. So the question is, how much exercise do we need? We can follow the recommendations from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They tell us that 5 days a week, we want to be getting 30 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity. And this could be something as simple as going on a brisk walk. If you don't have a full 30 minutes to devote to that on a given day, you can break that into increments as small as 10 minutes at a time. We know that once we've elevated our heart rate and maintained it for at least 10 minutes, that is what's associated with the release of those neurotransmitters that are the natural feel-good neurochemicals. So to the extent to which you can, build in time to get exercise every day. If you finish a meeting or a project early, very often the temptation is to check email or to scroll through our phones, but using that as a chance to go on a quick walk, that would be a much better use of that time, and that can give us a nice boost to our mental health. And that's especially the case if it's a nice day. There are a lot of benefits that we get just from exposure to nature and to direct sunlight. Let me share with you a couple of examples that alumni shared. So this is another one from Jacqueline Buxbaum. She says that she begins a 30-minute day meditation challenge. She began that on April 1st. Also signed up for a 21-day yoga challenge as well. Both bring calm to the beginning of each day. And that also is consistent with the research. Again, one of the things we know about sadness and anxiety is that when left to their own devices, those emotions can easily turn into negative thinking cycles. So it becomes really important to have strategies that can halt those negative thinking patterns, and physical activity has been shown to be an especially effective way to do that, because some of the neurotransmitters that are released are what we call inhibitory neurotransmitters, and that is what essentially puts the brakes on those negative thinking cycles that otherwise can easily spiral out of control. For those who have the gusto for a little bit more vigorous physical activity, I really like this example from one of my former students, Tyler Frank, class of 2015. He says, since March, I've taught virtual cycling classes for a cycle bar. I've also taught my energy step class, now called Step and Friends, to my friends via Zoom each Saturday morning since early April. And I'll be going live with Step on Instagram this week for the first time, so we should all follow Tyler for that. He says, teaching fitness classes has been a way to motivate friends and loved ones to stay active and also keep me accountable. And again, this is all consistent with what we know from the research on physical activity, that it also will often provide a sense of community, and it's another way to accomplish a particular goal, to lead to that satisfaction. So for a whole host of reasons, incorporating physical activity into our daily routines can be very helpful for our overall sense of psychological health and well-being. And the fourth and final one that I want to share with you is to, what I'm going to say, prioritize physical distancing instead of, quote, social distancing. There's been a lot of talk about social distancing lately, but I think that a much better phrase here, which other people have been using, this is not my own phrase, but I've heard other people call it physical distancing, and I like that phrase a lot. Certainly we want to keep a distance, but it's in times like these when it's more important than ever to maintain social connections with friends and family, whether that is through video chat or virtual happy hours or just a good old-fashioned phone call. That really is one of the most important ways to maintain our mental health, really at any time, but especially during a crisis. This picture here was actually submitted by Kara Chan from the class of 2002. She says, this is a virtual happy hour with WashU friends located all over the country: Houston, Seattle, New York City, San Francisco, Boston, Savannah. Being able to chat about working from home while taking care of kids and being teacher, our concerns about our city's responses to the virus and everything else has helped us feel less isolated. And that is precisely why social connection is so important for our overall psychological well-being, because very often it is that sense of companionship that we feel, especially when we are feeling stressors that we're not sure how to process. It's the act of talking those out with other people. Translating that emotion into language has been reliably shown to be one of the most effective ways to cope with negativity that we are grappling with in our daily lives. And especially if we're able to process that with other people who we have a relationship with, who we trust, that can really go a long way in recovering more quickly from that negativity and building community around that. Another example along these lines came from Pamela Herman. She says, connection is really critical for me. I stay in touch with one group by posting a daily pun category. I posted topics such as things in a kitchen, colors, or transportation, and members respond with a pun based on the category. I've also created Facebook groups to stay connected or hosted video calls to stay in touch with other social circles. So she shared an example of a pun that she posted recently. Today's pun off category is things that are cold. And you can see that there's an online community of people responding. One says, I see a lot of opportunities for good puns here, or let us know how you are doing. Not sure why Pamela suggested this category. Alaska. Well, Steve, there are a latte options. So I think that these are all great candidates for dad jokes as well. But, you know, again, this is the kind of thing that can divert our attention from the day's headlines about the things that are spiraling out of control. And of course, we should be giving attention to that. But there's also some value in giving attention to some opportunities for laughter and levity as well. And one final example that actually, I think, does a nice job of incorporating this last idea of the importance of social connection with the previous topic on the importance of physical activity came from Diana Hummel, a business school graduate from 1981. She says, I've always been someone who loves to be outside and get exercise. So when they closed the pools and beaches by my home in Florida, I had to get creative on what I could do for exercise for my mind and body. So instead of walking on the beach, I walk all around my neighborhood and adjoining neighborhoods, waving to neighbors as I walk by. I also walk to the beach, which at first was a tough tease for me, not being able to step foot on the sand, but I knew I'd appreciate it that much more when walking on the beach could be a part of my routine again. I've been encouraged by how many people were out just sitting on their lawn chairs during this tough time. They were saying it helped them deal with the isolation by just being out and seeing those of us who were walking around. So the silver lining in the situation is that many neighbors got to know each other while well, getting some fresh air and some exercise. And I love this example because in some ways it incorporates all four of those ideas. It's putting attention on the silver lining, the opportunity to still be grateful for something. It's accomplishing a goal, the sense of satisfaction from going out and getting exercise. The exercise itself is providing many benefits, both physically and psychologically. And here it's also incorporating a sense of connection as well. And that arguably is the single strongest predictor when it comes to our overall well-being, is the strength of our connections. And for many people, they're finding that this is a time to get to know neighbors, even from a distance of 6 feet or more, who otherwise they might not have had such conversations with. So to put all that into one slide, and then if you've got questions or comments or ideas, please feel free to submit those to the Q&A, and we should have plenty of time to respond to those. So I'm going to call this Tim's Tips to be Happier During a Global Crisis. Remember, the goal is not to be happy, but instead to be happier. So to the extent to which we can each day, we want to, number one, find something to be grateful for, even if it's something small, direct our attention to something good in our lives that we may simply have taken for granted. Number two, make progress toward a goal. And it doesn't have to be a big goal necessarily, but even something like making the bed or making a good breakfast. Find something that you feel accomplished at. Number three, do something to take care of yourself, especially your physical health. Remember, physical health is really at the foundation of psychological health. And fourth, reach out and connect with someone. If I had to reduce all of the research I talk about in my 15-week course on the science of happiness at WashU down to a single soundbite, I can tell you, hands down, the single strongest predictor of happiness and well-being is the strength of our social connections. Do we have friends and family to turn to when things are not going well? And do we have those people who can help us celebrate when things are going well? If we've got that, that is the most important predictor of happiness and well-being. So I hope that this presentation and these strategies can be useful in helping us navigate these trying times. And I also want to conclude by saying that, you know, all of these things that we've talked about here are easier said than done. Inevitably, there will be days when we are struggling with motivation. You know, there will be days when we don't feel like posting a pun category to Facebook or starting our day with a 6:30 a.m. Zoom exercise. There will be days when we don't feel like arranging a virtual happy hour with friends, and that's okay. On those days, I encourage you to practice self-compassion and go easy on yourself. And to wrap up my remarks here, I'd like to share with you a quote from a renowned St. Louisan, Maya Angelou, who once said, "Forgiveness is the greatest gift you can give yourself." And I really think that that starts with self-forgiveness and self-compassion. On those days when we're not at our best, I think that self-forgiveness really is one of the most important gifts that we can give ourselves. And then when you can, turn attention back to making progress in one of those four areas in ways that are realistic for you. So at this time, I will invite any questions or comments that you might have. If you should have other questions that come up after this that you think of later, feel free to reach out to me directly by email or Twitter. And Susan, I'll turn things back over to you and see if we received any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim. So first, I'm going to practice gratitude and say thank you so much for those wonderful remarks. I'm sure we're all thinking about what we can do this afternoon and the weeks ahead. So our first question is by Amit Advani, and hopefully I'll be pronouncing all of your names correctly. What are the noticeable differences in gender with regards to social distancing?
Oh, it's a really excellent question about the differences in gender. So one of the things that we have found in our research is that there generally are not a huge number of gender differences when it comes to to happiness or the pursuit of happiness or how the different strategies affect us. One of the things that we have been finding, though, is that on average, women tend to have what you might consider richer and more socially satisfying social networks, which means that women on average tend to have an easier time just picking up the phone and talking to someone. Whereas for men, and again, these are gross generalizations, but on average, in some ways, this is affecting men even more than it is affecting women because women tend to be more likely to reach out. So to in whatever ways are comfortable for us, if we can sort of circumvent any insecurities that we have and still just pick up the phone and call somebody or reach out in whatever ways are natural for us, even if it's extending beyond our comfort zone, I think that's certainly a worthwhile thing to do.
Another question, Tim, this is from someone anonymous. Any tips on what to do if we're having problems sleeping? I've heard that from many people that they're having problems sleeping during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a really important one because if I would have had time, another 30 minutes to list off a couple of other strategies, sleep would have been another one that is extremely important for a sense of well-being. So one of the things we know about sleep is that it's ultimately a brain activity. And that our ability to fall asleep and remain asleep is predicated entirely on the brain's ability to slow down. And so there could be a number of reasons why somebody's having difficulty getting good sleep at a time like this. What I would encourage you to do if you're having difficulty sleeping is pay attention to what you're doing in the hour or so before the time when you want to fall asleep. Because for a lot of people, the reason why they're having difficulty sleeping right now is because they're watching the news or some other program on TV, or they're scrolling through social media and they're seeing all these headlines, which is then creating anxiety. And that anxiety, we know that anxiety itself is a brain activity, keeps the brain waves really active, which then makes it more difficult for those brain waves to slow down so that we can then fall asleep. So again, I'm not saying you shouldn't watch the news, but maybe you watch an earlier newscast, or maybe you have a time, if you're trying to get to bed by 11 p.m., you say, okay, I'm not going to look at social media or anything on the computer after 10 p.m., and instead do an activity that's a little bit more relaxing. Another thing that's related here that proves to be problematic for people in terms of falling asleep at night is that many people will, even after they're in bed under the covers, they reach for their phone and they're scrolling through social media, they're looking at email, and there are two things going on there. One, you're giving your brain lots of activity that's keeping the brain waves really active. The other thing is that the light from those devices, when it enters the visual system, that also is suppressing the release of hormones that allow us to feel drowsy so that we can fall asleep. So again, paying attention to what we're doing in the hour or so before sleep and doing what we can to engage in behaviors that are calming and relaxing, that's a good place to start if you're having difficulty sleeping at night.
Thank you. Here's a question. I think this pandemic has been especially difficult for elderly parents or elderly relatives who are isolated. How can we help them most by using some of your strategies?
Yeah, yes, especially for many older adults, they may have had activities in the community that they no longer are able to do, and for many of them, they are retired, and so they're not necessarily able to accomplish as many tasks during the day that give them that sense of fulfillment. So I think that one of the most important things that we can do there is still get creative in the ways that we can reach out to them. So you see a lot of people who are traveling to their parents' or grandparents' homes and standing at the driveway while the folks inside are inside, and just offering that sense of connection, or seeing if you can run errands for them, do grocery shopping that you have to leave at the doorstep for safety reasons, but still performing some gesture so that they still know that people care about them. And also, depending on their comfort levels with technology, if they do have a computer or a cell phone, still reaching out to them, at very least having a good old-fashioned phone call, even if they do not have the modern technology that allows for FaceTime or Zoom. But many older adults are technologically savvy. And so, teaching them how to use those in ways that they can still see people while they're having the conversation. Connection is the most important thing that we can offer somebody. So getting creative about doing that in any ways that we can be very useful.
Here's a great question. Tim, what are you doing to practice some of your strategies during this time?
It's a really, really important question. So one thing, it's been a lot of fun actually just to put this webinar together, because it kind of prompted me to do that. But I can tell you in terms of my own routines. So I still wake up, so I very much protect the hours from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. As the time when I'm sleeping. And my friends and family know, do not call me between 10 and 11, because that's the time when I need to allow my brainwaves to start slowing down. So even though my schedule now, especially now that my classes are over, would very easily allow me to kind of keep more flexible hours, I still have my alarm clock go off at 7 a.m. I still wake up. I do not put my phone by my bedstand. I keep it in a corner of my room where I do meditation first thing in the morning. So before I even check email, before I do anything else, I do 10 minutes of meditation. I kind of get ready, I get dressed, and then I go for a walk around the neighborhood for 30 minutes to get some physical activity. The other thing that I've found to be very helpful is when I schedule Zoom meetings, I will do what I can to schedule them for 45 minutes instead of for an hour. Or if I'm not able to do that, I will put a buffer of at least 15 minutes in between them. Because one of the things that I underestimated when these stay-at-home orders first took effect was that I was just scheduling meetings hourly, not taking into consideration that when I'm at the university, I have travel time. I'm able to walk from one office to another. And when I was just sitting at my computer, I was getting Zoom fatigue. I was exhausted by the end of the day. I have a colleague in the public health school at WashU who says that sitting is the new smoking. And I learned the hard way what she meant by that. So I build in time in between those meetings to get up, stretch my legs. And if I have enough time, I'll get outside. Spending time in nature proves to be very helpful. So still incorporating, ways to accomplish that sense of tasks that are allowing me to work toward goals, getting some physical activity. I live very close to Forest Park, so I still maintain, my routines by getting that level of physical activity. And also, I prioritize reaching out to friends and family. And honestly, I've had more phone calls with friends and alumni. I mean, just this morning, I've already spoken with two friends who have just, they call on their way to work or in between meetings and things. And that's actually something I hope that will be a carryover even after all these bans are lifted.
Tim, we've had a couple questions regarding children, especially younger children who are really having their own set of challenges, trying to understand that they can't go to the pool this summer, they can't go to camp. Any advice on how we should be sharing these messages with them?
Yeah, I think that that's a really important one because we know that a lot of people are struggling with this, not only for themselves, but as you say, with their children as well. I think that it's important to explain, and you know your children better than anybody. So, you can be the one to decide that the specific language that you use. But I think it's important to bring children to a level of understanding that there is this global pandemic that's occurring, that everybody in the world is having to be mindful of this so that we don't get sick and so that we can protect our most vulnerable populations. And again, you can use the language that the child will understand. But I also think that this is an opportunity to model for a child what it is like to experience adversity and how, there are times where, we're not in control of every situation and its outcome, but we are in control of our attitude and the way that we deal with it. And that all throughout life, there's disappointment. And there's things like vacations or summer camp that we had been looking forward to that get canceled, that we aren't able to do anymore. And that unfortunately, we don't get to control that all the time, but we can control the attitude that we bring to it. And so, allowing the child to feel disappointed, we know that it's a bad thing to suppress our emotions or say, you shouldn't feel anxious, that's just the way it is. No, allow the child to feel whatever they're feeling, but then also redirect attention to other things that allows us to do. Well, we can't do this. This is upsetting. This is disappointing. But let's think about what else we can do. And you see kids in the neighborhood, with sidewalk chalk, making inspirational messages, or they're FaceTiming, or they're calling friends. They're finding some other alternative. I think that is what allows a child to develop a sense of resilience. And there's a huge body of research showing that that's among the most important skills for a child to develop, because that resilience is what allows them to persevere during school, during other activities that are important, during relationships all throughout their lives. So this, I think, is a really special opportunity for parents to help a child to navigate that difficulty and those challenges.
Here's another question. Virtual social gatherings and catch-ups were very popular at the beginning of the quarantine, but the pace has fallen a bit. How has screen fatigue really influenced this?
Yeah. Well, so, and this is something that so many people have experienced on so many levels, because I think that when everybody started this, it was kind of like a marathon. When you talk to a lot of people who run really long distances, they'll tell you like, oh, the first couple of miles, you're great, you're optimistic, this is going to be awesome, I'm going to get this. And then by like the 10th or 15th mile, there's just this fatigue of, wait a second, I've already come so far. And the end is really not in sight yet. I mean, there's still a long way for me to go. And there is kind of this wonder of like, how much longer can I realistically continue to do this? And I think that's kind of where we are now. We've been at this for 2 months and we're kind of exhausted by it. And it's not clear really when the end is going to be in sight. And so I think that when it comes specifically to Zoom fatigue, I think that many of us may have underestimated that. I know that I myself did that when they told me that classes would be converted to an online format. I was like, oh, well, if anything, this will just be easier. I'll just record my lectures and upload them, no problem. But I found that I was more exhausted in my apartment by myself talking at my computer than I was in an auditorium with 300 people. And it's because there's something about occupying the same physical space as other people that allows you to sort of extract a certain level of energy from that, that sort of propels that conversation forward when you're physically together versus when you're sort of looking at everybody on screens and you've lost some element of the nonverbal behavior and the nonverbal energy that otherwise I think we take for granted when we do have those opportunities. So I think that, you know, it stands to reason if you are feeling tired, it's okay to perhaps reduce those, but I wouldn't cut them out altogether, or maybe you have to resort to a different way of doing that. Part of what was exciting is that it was new and novel and everybody brought that fresh energy like at the beginning of a marathon. And now, you know, we're starting to fall off a little bit, but I would encourage you, if you can, to sort of resurrect those even a little bit, even if you have to space them out or acknowledge, okay, I have to sort of take this in stride, doing whatever you can to maintain social connection right now. That really is one of the strongest and most important predictors of happiness and well-being.
Okay, another question. What can we do to reduce anxiety about being in public places, or reduce anxiety about job uncertainty and the future?
Yeah. So that's a really important question because we know that anxiety in particular is affecting so many people right now. And what really propels anxiety is the uncertainty about what the future is going to hold, whether it's uncertainty about our jobs or uncertainty about what is safe. You know, how much, you know, do I need to wash down my groceries? Is it okay to open mail? I mean, those are the kinds of questions that people are looking at right now. And we don't have all the answers because this is a novel coronavirus. So I think that when it comes to anxiety, it's important to ask ourselves, what are the facts? What is the information that we currently have from our experts? And based on that information, what are the things that are still within my control? Because remember, what's really at the foundation of all of these strategies for psychological health and well-being has to do with that sense of autonomy. And because we're not able to go out in society as freely as we used to be able to, that is threatening our autonomy in ways that are undermining our overall well-being. So understanding what the precautions are from our experts in public health and in medicine, following their recommendations that yes, it is safe to go outside, but wear a mask, you know, wash your hands, you know, understanding those behaviors that are still within our control and prioritizing them. That is what can give us some semblance of, hey, if this were completely unsafe, then, you know, very likely those precautions would be phrased quite differently. And when it comes to the uncertainty around our jobs, you know, I think that we all are experiencing that to a certain extent because we don't know what the ramifications across the board are going to be here. I think that it's important every day to ask ourselves, what is the information that I know to be true today? And based on that information, how can I make decisions? How can I work as hard as I can today based on the opportunities that I still have? And then as things change, I might have to change course and I'll have to trust myself that I'll know how to do that when I cross, you know, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But taking things one day at a time, I think, is especially important here. Yes, we should be planning for the future and considering contingencies, but we also have to think about what do I know to be true about today? Because otherwise, if we get too far ahead of ourselves, that's going to undermine our ability to make as much progress within those areas that are still under our control.
Okay, this will be our final question, and from one of your students, Taylor Emerson, who writes, "Hi, Dr. Bono. I learned from your positive psych course this semester that being pro-social is important for one's well-being. During this time, how do you best recommend we can give back to the community from our homes?"
What a great question. Hi, Taylor. Thanks for tuning in all the way from Los Angeles. Great to connect with you in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, so I'm glad. So let me just say, I'm very grateful that a student was paying such close attention on the unit on pro-social behavior, because I think we covered that one while all this pandemic stuff was going on. So yeah, we know that pro-social behavior is really important because it allows us to feel a sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves, but it becomes more difficult and more challenging to do that because we physically cannot be as close to others as we can be. But I've seen a lot of examples of people nonetheless coming together to do this. So there are soup kitchens and food pantries now that are finding ways to prepare food for those who are less fortunate in ways that still maintain social distance while you're doing that. I've seen people I even have a student who was in our class who was a senior looking forward to graduation. And she was actually featured in a version of the Record a couple of weeks ago. And her quote was, you know, when I found out that graduation was canceled, I realized that I could either sit in my room and cry and eat ice cream because I was so disappointed, or I could take my skills as a fashion design major and do something good with that. And so she stayed at home and she made masks that she then sent all around the country. Now, not all of us have that ability to sew and to do those things, but still finding, you know, whatever talents we have, even if it's mailing cards to people who we know, you know, are on the front lines or are essential workers, or putting up yard signs to show support, that still is a prosocial behavior that is affecting other people in the community. And again, that sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves, that really is foundational to a sense of well-being. You know, in whatever ways we're able to do that, that really can go a long way toward our sense of well-being.
Tim, thank you again. We really appreciate taking time out of your schedule. I hope all of you, we had, I think, over nearly 300 of you listening. I hope everyone was able to take something away and find some strategies that you can apply in your own lives. We look forward to seeing all of you again during a future event. If you do have recommendations for speakers, please feel free to email them to us at alumniassociation.worcester.edu. Or Alumni Association at worcester.edu. I think there should be a slide coming up to give you that email address. And additionally, we encourage you to visit the Digital Resources and Virtual Opportunities page on our website and learn about other ways that you can connect with one another, with students, with alumni and faculty. This talk will be posted on that site on the Digital Resources page. Give us a day to get it up there. And then it will also be on our YouTube channel as well. So with that, we wish all of you good health, well-being, and continue to stay safe. And thank you for joining us. Thank you.